Hello Texans, welcome back to another episode of Texans Sports Minute. It's been a long time since we last met, so we've got a lot to cover. In this week's episode, we'll be talking about the football team's final game of the regular season, volleyball's regular season-ending road trip, and the results in the LSC Championship Tournament. The men's and women's basketball team have fully kicked off their season, so we'll see how they are doing as of today. Let's kick things off with football. The football team ended their regular season in Commerce, Texas. They took on the 8th-ranked Lions. The Texans looked well to pull off the upset for nearly all of the first half. The Texan offense would strike first after Joseph Salyer capped off a 96-yard drive with a 2-yard touchdown run to put the Texans up 7-0 late in the first quarter. After that, the Texans would add to their lead as Sergio Sirocco booted a 44-yard field goal to put the Texans up 10-0 early in the second quarter. The Texan defense would hold the dangerous Lion offense to no points in the first 29 minutes of play. Commerce wouldn't get on the scoreboard until the last 10 seconds of the half on a 44-yard touchdown pass to cut the Texans' lead down to 3. However, when the second half struck, it was all A&M Commerce from that point on. The Lions would open the second half with a touchdown on their opening drive. After the offense would continue to find a rhythm, the Lions would put up 16 more points by the end of the night, while the Texan offense would struggle to find a groove in the second half. They failed to get any points on the board after the second quarter. The 30-10 loss would mark the end of the Texan football season. With the loss, they ended 5-6 overall and 5-4 in conference play. However, 4 of the 6 Texan losses would be by a touchdown or less. The Texan football team will gear up for the next season. They look to take that LSC championship of the 2017 season. On to volleyball, the Texans finished up their last 2 games of the regular season and competed in the LSC Championship since we last met. The Texans played both their last 2 regular season games in New Mexico and come away with a win in both contests. First, the Texans would take on the Eastern New Mexico Mustangs, and despite losing their first 2 sets, they would battle back to get the victory. The last 3 sets we dominated both offensively and defensively by the Texans. They would win by the remaining sets by a margin of 5 points or more to secure the win in Silver City. The very next day, the Texans traveled to Port Sales, New Mexico to take on the Eastern New Mexico Greyhounds. This game would not be nearly as dramatic for the Texans. They would finish off the Greyhounds in 3 sets. Eastern New Mexico is coming off an 8-game home winning streak, including a win against the top-ranked Angelo State Rams. However, the Texans would not follow in these teams' footsteps as they would snap the Greyhounds streak to end their regular season with these 2 victories. The Texans earned the number 2 seed in the LC Championship Tournament. The Texans competed in the second seed Texans took on the 7th seed Western New Mexico Mustangs for the second time in a week, except this time the Texans didn't have to travel 700 miles to do it. At the Janelle Center in San Angelo, Texas, the Texans swept the Mustangs in 3 sets to advance to the semifinals, where they took on A&M Kingsville. The Texans faced off against the 3rd seed Javelinas in the semifinal round. The Javelinas would keep it close, as the Texans would win the first set by only 2 points. The second set would end in the same 2-point margin, except with Kingsville coming away with the victory. Their win would be short-lived, however, as the Texan defense held the Javelinas just 13 points in the 3rd set, as the Texans would come away with the win. The 4th set would fall in favor of the Texans once again. In the final set, Kingsville was held to only 16 points, as the Texans would take it all. The 3-1 victory would send the Texans to the finals, where they would take on the Angelo State Rams. The Texans were riding a huge wave of momentum coming into this, as their 2 LC tournament victories took their win streak to 8 games, but the Rams would prove too much for the Texans. They wouldn't play with their usual selves either. This game, they committed an uncharacteristic 18 errors and only hit .189 in the matchup. Even though the Texans fell in 3 sets, they kept things close in all matches, but ultimately the 31-3 Rams would claim the LC championship for the 2nd straight season. Even though the Texans didn't claim the championship, the NCAA selected the Texans to participate in the NCAA Division II South Central Regional Tournament. The Texans earned the 3rd seed and will take on the 16 Regis University Rangers. The regional tournament will take place at the Janelle Center at Angelo State University and will start on December 1st and end on December 3rd. Now for basketball, the Texans opened up their season on the 11th of November and since then have played 5 games. The Texans season did get off to the best start as they've dropped 4 of the last 5 they've played, bringing their record to 1-4 in non-conference matchups. The first match of the season, the Texans took on Missouri S&T and found themselves on the short end of a thriller as they lost in the last minute 66-68. The Texans' second game wasn't as close as they fell to St. Mary's 53-65 at Wisdom Gym. After their first 2 games, the Texans went all the way to Pueblo, Colorado to take place in the Al-Carey Shrine Classic. The Texans took on Western State and would record their first win of the season. They came away with the victory in comfortable fashion, 52-37. The next day, the Texans would take on the undefeated tournament hosts, the Colorado State of Pueblo Thunderwolves. The Thunderwolves would prove too much for the Texans, though, as they would fall 64-76. The Texans would continue their road stint, but would come back to Texas to take on St. Mary's again, but this time in San Antonio. The 5-1 Rattlers would once again come away with the victory, 48-36, to push the Texans' record to 1-4. Although things don't look the best for the Texans at the moment, all 4 losses came from non-conference opponents who had a winning record of .667 throughout 6 games. And if that sounds complicated, that's because it is. The gist of it is that the Texans can easily brush off these losses once they start facing LSU opponents. The Texans will do just that on December 1st when they take on school rival Midwestern State at 5:30 right here in Wisdom Gym. The men's basketball team, on the other hand, is off to a great start. The Texans have improved to 4-1 since they started off their season on November 11th. The Texans opened up their season ranked 10th and would prove their worth early in the season. In the Whataburger Tip-Off Classic, the Texans made short work at Adams State in their 89-59 victory to start the season off with a 30-point win. The next day, the Texans would go on to beat the University of Colorado Springs 73-64 in front of a home crowd here in Stephenville. The Texans would continue to roll as they took down the University of Concordia 67-58 and improved to 3-0 in the season. This start jumped the Texans up to number 7 in the National Association of Basketball Coaches poll. After this great start, the Texans did a slight speed bump in the Thanksgiving Classic. They fell in the final seconds to Colorado State Pueblo 79-78. The Texans would respond in a big way in this, however, as the next day they rolled over the Emmanuel College Lions by 28 points for the 75-47 victory. With that win, the Texans moved to 4-1 on the season as they look to take on Midwestern State to start LSD Conference play right here in Wisdom Gym on December 1st at 7:30. Well, that's all for this week. Tune in next time for all the sports your hearts can handle. Signing off is Channing Flatt.